Since we last spoke to you, Palmer, Anduril went out, raised a lot more money, another $120 million, and nearly a $1 billion valuation. So more money that you guys can use, keep building out that defense technology. But it's also interesting, Palmer, when I talk to executives here, you guys are not shy that you intend to take on those big defense contractors. You are looking to take on Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed. I think some investors want to know, what do you think Anduril's just sort of competitive advantages are in that fight?
Sure, and that is what we're trying to do. You know, we're a defense technology company first. We're not a consumer technology company dabbling in defense work. We, from day one, said, what can we develop that really helps the U.S. Department of Defense and that helps keep our, America and our allies safe? And that's why we're building artificial intelligence-powered hardware and software. I think that we have a few big competitive advantages. The first thing is that we have a really strong team that comes from areas where the experts in autonomy, computer vision, machine learning, networking, those types of things actually are. Lockheed, Raytheon, kind of the traditional defense primes, they're good at building some things. They're good at building aircraft carriers. They're good at building fighter interceptors. But they do not have the world's best talent when it comes to artificial intelligence, computer vision, machine learning, those types of things. And that's why our company's focusing on that, because we think we can add a lot of value there that other people cannot necessarily add.
Do you think, though, Palmer, some investors might hear you and say, wait a second, these are big companies, sizable R&D budgets, smart engineers, they got big lobbying arms. I mean, isn't it going to be tough for you to ultimately displace these giants?
In a way, I think the size actually works in our favor. If there was a big landscape of smaller, highly competitive players, I think we'd actually have a harder time raising money. But as it is, investors look and they say, hey, the whole field is dominated by a handful of players that make all of the money. They're old, they're very slow moving, they don't have all of the best talent. That type of market is the one where you can believe the most that somebody can come in and disrupt it.
What about some of competition? It's not just defense contractors. What about some competition, potentially from big tech? I'm thinking about Microsoft.
Sure.
Pentagon awards them this $10 billion cloud computing contract. It sounds like Amazon is going to protest that, but they also won that almost $500 million to build AR goggles for the Army. Do you consider Satya Nadella's company a serious rival?
No, actually, I think that we're going to be doing a lot of work with Microsoft on a lot of this stuff. You're not going to have one company owning everything anyway. I'm glad that Microsoft and Amazon are vigorously competing for this JEDI contract. Contrast that with Google that dropped out because they said they couldn't be sure the government was going to abide to their internal corporate ethics principles. I think that there's a big difference, though, between what Amazon and Microsoft are doing with, let's say, JEDI and what we're doing. Microsoft has said that the military will always have access to their best technology, and that's true, but they also are selling to everyone. They're building a product that's for everyone. Everything that we're building is specifically for the Department of Defense. We're not going out there and saying, let's resell the thing that, where we make 90% of our money in the consumer or the enterprise space. We're going and saying, what do they need? What is the absolute perfect thing? And I don't think that Microsoft, Amazon, or any of these big tech companies are going to go all in and say, we are going to build products that are going to be controversial, part of the kill chain, and designed specifically for DoD. Because if it reduces their consumer or enterprise sales by 1%, or if it increases controversy by 1%, it's likely not worth doing.
Got it, Palmer. I think, Morgan, you had a question?
I do. Palmer, thanks for being with us today. Just to dig into that a little bit further, I know you guys just touched on JEDI, which certainly is, once again, the news of the day today. But from the Department of Defense side of things, given the future threat landscape and what that'll entail, especially when you look to other countries like China, which the U.S. has identified as a strategic competitor going into the future, do you think the government has its arms around what it takes to vet out technology and counter those future threats?
I don't think that they have their mind around exactly the best way to do that, but they know that they need to change. They know that they need to move faster. Look at the United States. There's only 2 unicorns in the defense space in the last 30 years, Palantir and SpaceX. And SpaceX is, they didn't start out to be a defense company. It just happens that the largest provider of launch is the U.S. government. I love SpaceX. I don't want to disparage them, but it's worth noting. Contrast that with China, where you have lots of new companies doing defense work, lots of consumer technology companies doing really strong defense work. China has a very strong pipeline from new tech to military deployment. And I think the United States knows that they can learn a little bit from that and that they're going to have to if they're going to keep up with our adversaries, who are honestly much better at that innovation pipeline than we are right now.
Does the U.S., I want to pick up on that, in your opinion, Palmer, we're talking about who leads in defense technology, who leads in defense innovation. Is it the U.S. or is it China? How do you gauge those two?
Oh, I think that we lead right now, and especially when it comes to conventional conventional military force, when it comes to conventional military operations. But I don't think that the United States leads in the technologies that are going to be relevant to the warfare of the future. I think that the U.S. is falling behind in areas like autonomy and artificial intelligence. I think that China has structural advantages over the United States because they're willing to surveil their entire population and use it as a training system for their artificial intelligence models. I'm not saying that we should do that. I'm very much against that, in fact. But we do have to realize that China has certain structural advantages. Another is that in China, the government, by law, is able to take any technology they want from the private sector and use it for military purposes. So, in the United States, we're lucky that our companies are even able to say, I don't want to work with the government. I don't agree with Google's decision to pull out of the JEDI contract, for example, but I am very supportive of their right to do so. And again, I'm not saying we need to be more like China on this. I think that would be terrible. But we do have to recognize that there are structural advantages in what they're doing. And so we have to not just do the same thing they're doing. We have to try new things, better things, and alternate routes that they don't, where they don't really have such a strong advantage.
And Jonathan, you had a question?
I do, Palmer. Hi, it's John Fort. I believe you mentioned making your technology available to the U.S. and our allies. I wonder if you have an internal process for determining which of those allies should have access to your technology, or if you view that as the U.S. government's role to make that determination about technologies like yours that could enhance an AI process or influence people's civil liberties.
I view that as the U.S. government's role because they have a lot more information than I have. They know a lot more about the moving pieces than I do. And I don't want to live in a country where you have a corporatocracy of executives deciding what U.S. foreign policy is going to be. I think that's very dangerous. And so, I think that usually the U.S. is pretty clear cut on these things. Like, people often ask me, well, would you sell your stuff to Russia? Would you sell your stuff to China? And I usually tell them, hey, I don't have to pretend to be the good guy here. There's actually a lot of laws that regulate how we export things. You have to get permission to export certain things to certain countries. And I think that's the way it should be. You shouldn't have any company in the United States able to just take their technology that has military applications and spread it all over the world. So, like we're doing work with the United States, we've been doing work with the UK, we've been doing work with a few strong U.S. allies, and the U.S. government is really supportive of that. If we were to go rogue and start saying, hey, we're going to sell to people the U.S. doesn't like, I think that would change very quickly.
As you sell this technology, though, Palmer, to the U.S., to its allies, like the UK, it is powerful, it is cutting edge, it's dynamic. Are you ever worried it's going to be used in ways that maybe you and the Anduril team didn't envision or didn't intend?
I think that every technology will be used in ways that we never envisioned, but what you have to do is try to build accountability into it from the very start. And so we're building software and hardware tools that let military operators understand everything that's going on around them, to give them perfect omniscience over their area of operations. Obviously, that could be used by the wrong person. If you give people more information, it now makes it a bigger liability if they're compromised. It makes it more important to get your network security right so that nobody can break into your system and use it against you. But at the same time, I think there's a ton of advantages. Machines can't be bribed. Machines can't be turned nearly as easily as people can. And so if we can make a system that is, on the whole, a lot more robust to abuse, I think that that's the best you can hope for.
Is it also, Palmer, though, are you implicitly saying you just have a lot of trust and faith in the U.S. government, the U.S. military?
I have a lot of trust and faith in the U.S. military as an institution when you give them the tools they need to be accountable. When you give them more information about how their systems are being used, when they were deployed, what they were deployed for, I think that they have really strong systems to make sure that things are not misused, and that when they are misused, there are consequences and there is liability to the right person. And I think one of the big examples here is that the United States has a really strong policy around making sure that humans stay in the loop on any kind of deployment on autonomous weapons. A person always has to take responsibility for any kind of lethal action, and other countries don't have that sense of responsibility. And I think the United States is way ahead when it comes to the ethics of autonomy as it applies to warfare.
And Morgan, you got another one?
I do. Palmer, I want to get your thoughts on something that's unfortunately become a bit of a hot topic button, but I want to move beyond the politics of it and get your thoughts on border security, because actually, historically speaking, border security has been in focus, and the idea of a quote-unquote virtual wall has been attempted by the U.S. since really the mid-1990s. We've seen a number of projects happen and fail, probably the most high-profile being the SBI Net program that was contracted out to Boeing. The technology you're developing today, part of the reason we haven't seen effective border walls implemented and even having a conversation about an actual structure, an actual metal structure being put up, is because the technology has not been cost effective, and it hasn't actually been productive or effective. Has the technology evolved enough now that that is a different conversation than it used to be?
Yes, the technology is there. Our company is there. One of our we do a lot of work with Customs and Border Protection. Our Sentry Towers are covering hundreds of square miles along the U.S. border, on the northern border and the southern border, actually. And I think that the time is now. You know, we can have a perfect picture of everything that is coming across the U.S. border. We can have a perfect picture of every vehicle, every person, every drone. Maybe not perfect, maybe just 99% right. But hey, that's a lot better than what's out there right now in a lot of these places. And the other advantage of what we're doing is that you don't necessarily have to slice and dice the land into different pieces. I mean, we do a lot of work with the landowners that are along the border, putting our towers out there. Most of these guys, they want border security. They want to protect their land from being used for drug trafficking, human trafficking in both directions. But what they don't want is often a physical wall that is cutting their land apart, making it impossible for their cattle to water, along the Rio Grande, things like that. And so our tech really makes it a lot easier for those two things to come together, to have strong border security without infringing on anyone's property rights.
A final question, Luckey. I'm interested to get your take. Do you think Anduril benefits because you are a well-known supporter of President Donald Trump? Does that benefit the company when you're competing for government work? And if it does, is that any kind of risk for Anduril if President Trump doesn't win re-election?
I think that the DOD is really nonpartisan. I think that people focus on, look, politics make up a tiny fraction of a percent of what I spend my time doing, what I spend working on. I think that it's the thing that gets a lot of media attention and people focus on it. The reality is the DOD, they go through different administrations. They're working on the same projects, administration to administration. There's not a lot of change on a partisan basis for the most part. I think that we're going to do well under a Republican president. I think we'll do well under a Democrat president. I think we would do well under a libertarian president. I think if any other party were to ever get relevance, then that would probably...
It's interesting, though, probably, because he's one of your big backers, though, is Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. I mean, Peter is a guy who seems like he has the president's ear, but you're saying that doesn't have a meaningful impact when you're competing for that government work?
I don't think so. I don't think that the people in the DOD are taking those things into account. And like Peter, the reason he's an investor in us, it's not because we agree on the president. It's because Founders Fund, which is Peter's fund, was the first institutional investor in Oculus. I have a relationship going back with Peter. He believed in virtual reality when there had never been a successful virtual reality company in history. So he's able to see when things are going to work before other people see that they're going to work. I think that it's the same thing here. It's very clear that the U.S. Department of Defense needs more companies doing strong technology work and saying we will stick with the government. We're not going to back down. We're not going to say we can't work with you because it's too controversial.